Beneath the surface of paradise, a silent contest is unfolding. In the warm waters and scattered islands of the Southwest Pacific, great powers are vying for influence. It's a new kind of great game, one where infrastructure, diplomacy, and security deals are the tools of competition, not armies. And at the heart of it all, the People's Republic of China and the traditional Western powers of the United States, Australia, and New Zealand. For decades, the Southwest Pacific was largely overlooked, a small island nation, remote and sparsely populated, but not anymore. These countries sit atop vast maritime zones. Their votes matter at the United Nations. Their land, ports, and digital infrastructure are now strategic assets in an era of global rivalry. Enter China. Over the past 2 decades, Beijing has moved aggressively to reshape the region in its image, with roads, ports, stadiums, and security pacts. Western-aligned powers, caught off guard, are scrambling to respond. But to understand how we got here, we need to look back. Many of these nations were once colonized by Britain, France, or Germany. Others were administered by Australia, New Zealand, or the United States under post-war arrangements. Their modern state systems are recent, with independence often coming only in the 1960s through to the 1980s. Since independence, many Pacific nations have faced major development challenges. Remote geographies, small populations, and reliance on imports means they need external support to build infrastructure, run health systems, and respond to natural disasters. For decades, Western powers, especially Australia and New Zealand, filled this role, often with a sense of paternalism. But as climate change intensifies and economic needs grow, Pacific leaders have increasingly sought more options. China, with its readiness to invest quickly and without the same governance conditions, offered a compelling alternative. At the same time, the geopolitical stakes have risen. The Pacific lies across vital sea lanes. Its islands, ports, and airfields can shape military logistics. Their vast economic zones hold rich fisheries and seabed resources. And diplomatically, each island nation represents a critical vote in international bodies. Suddenly, the Southwest Pacific is no longer a quiet corner of the world. It's a strategic crossroads. In the early 2000s, China's Pacific presence was modest. It competed mainly with Taiwan for diplomatic recognition, offering modest aid and fishing agreements. Meanwhile, Australia and New Zealand, along with US in the north, held sway. These were the years when Pacific nations were still heavily reliant on their traditional donors. Australia and New Zealand provided the lion's share of aid, while the US focused mostly on its compact states in the north. Governance support, education programs, and post-conflict peacekeeping missions dominated the aid landscape. China, meanwhile, started making careful moves. It provided low-interest roads for infrastructure, funded civic buildings like parliamentary houses, and opened embassies in countries. Beijing was watching, listening, and laying the groundwork. Pacific leaders, particularly those frustrated with the conditions of Western aid and what they saw as a lack of responsiveness, began to take notice. China's approach, less bureaucracy, faster results, and a handoff attitude about internal politics. It stood in contrast to Western donor norms. By the mid-2000s, countries like Fiji and Papua New Guinea were already cultivating closer economic ties with China. Fiji, following a coup in 2006 and facing sanctions from the West, found China willing to provide diplomatic support and development assistance. This period set the stage for deeper strategic shifts to come. It was less a spirit, more a careful infiltration. But the message was clear. The Pacific was opening up to new partnerships, and China was stepping through the door. The 2010s marked a dramatic shift. China poured billions into the Pacific, from roads in Papua New Guinea to a massive stadium in the Solomon Islands, to loans that transformed Tonga's skyline. This surge in funding wasn't random. It aligned with the launch of China's Global Belt and Road Initiative in 2013. Pacific nations began signing up, drawn by the promise of fast infrastructure development. Ports, highways, airports, and government buildings sprang up with Chinese financing, often constructed by Chinese firms. By the middle of the decade, China had become one of the largest sources of infrastructure finance in the region. Its projects were often flashy and tangible, designed to show results quickly. Unlike Western aid, which often targeted governance reforms or long-term social programs, Chinese assistance built things you could see and touch. But that came with growing concern. Debt levels began to rise. Tonga, for instance, owed more than 40% of its GDP to Chinese lenders. Observers began talking about debt trap diplomacy, even as some Pacific leaders defended China's support as essential for their development. Diplomatically, China increased its presence, holding high-level visits and launching regional summits. It opened more embassies and began hosting Pacific leaders in Beijing with grand ceremonies and generous promises. Meanwhile, the Western powers were slow to respond. But as China's footprint grew, alarm bells started ringing. Australia rolled out its Pacific Step Up in 2017, pledging more infrastructure funding and diplomatic attention. New Zealand followed with its Pacific Reset, focusing on people-to-people ties and climate resilience. The United States too began re-engaging, but for much of the 2010s, China had the initiative. It wasn't just playing catch-up, it was defining the game. The decade ended with a clear message. The Pacific was no longer a quiet sphere of influence for the West. It had become a contested zone, with China now an undeniable player in the future. In 2019, the Solomon Islands and Kiribati switched allegiances from Taiwan to China. In 2022, a secret security pact between China and the Solomon Islands sent shockwaves through Western capitals. Beijing now trains Pacific police, builds dual-use ports, and hosts summits with island nations. China's presence has shifted from purely economic to strategic, quietly embedding itself into the region's law enforcement, digital infrastructure, and internal politics. Western powers have responded swiftly. The US reopened its embassy in the Solomon Islands, signed new defense agreements with Papua New Guinea, and held 2 historic Pacific Island summits at the White House. Australia inked a security pact with Tuvalu and dramatically increased its aid budget. Fiji, now under new leadership, reorientated its foreign policy by cancelling a policing agreement with China, signalling a return to traditional allies. Samoa has become a cautious balancer, while Tonga, heavily indebted to China, still leans on Australia and New Zealand for stability. China's influence continues to grow in places like Vanuatu and Kiribati, where infrastructure projects and diplomatic support are winning over the elites. But questions remain about the long-term sustainability and transparency of these projects. The Pacific is now a hotbed of strategic maneuvering, where every infrastructure deal and diplomatic handshake has a deeper geopolitical implication. So what? It is clear that this geopolitical battle is far from over. While China currently has influence over countries like Vanuatu, it is possible this will fade as the short-term wins of infrastructure projects fall away, leaving only the long-term debt. However, to counter China, the Western powers need to step up in a big way, likely providing support for these small island nations, particularly as climate change causes chaos for the low-lying islands. Regardless, China is highly unlikely to back down and will possibly go even further in what they can offer, particularly with the goal of securing a permanent naval base in the region, something they will possibly attempt to do using debt trap diplomacy. One thing is clear though, the Pacific Islands are no longer on the periphery. They are central to the Indo-Pacific strategy, and every decision, every port built, every diplomatic visit, every island vote at the UN will shape the global power balances. The Pacific is not just a playground for powers, it's a home, a region of sovereign nations with dreams of resilience, sustainability and dignity. As China and the West compete, the question is not just who will win influence, the question is, can the Pacific win too? Thank you for watching. Make sure to like, comment and subscribe. I've been your host Daniel, and I'll see you next time. See you!